Hi, everyone. My name is Mika, and I'm from Social Policy Research Associates, which is a small evaluation firm located in Oakland. I'm so happy to be here today to share findings from the final report of our evaluation of the Beacon Community School expansion. I'm here with my colleague, Heather. We have a large team that has worked recently on the project, including the original co-director, Rachel Estrella, Marianne Queller, and Anna Marie Ramos were core writers on the final report. Other members of the team over the last year include Cassandra Lynn, Sahej Singh, Isis Covington, and Lorraine Sturdivant. Before we go further, I want to share a little bit more about our evaluation. In 2019, SPR was selected by DCYF to conduct a multi-year evaluation of the expansion of Beacon programs from 9 schools to 27. Due to the pandemic, our evaluation does not look at all like what we had originally planned. We spent one whole year evaluating the Community Hubs initiative rather than Beacons, and we have unfortunately been unable to visit programs in person. Instead of the impact evaluation we had originally planned to do, we have focused instead on documenting the ways that Beacon programs have supported schools over the last several years during what was a difficult and tumultuous time. And here's our agenda for today. We'll begin with an overview of the data sources that informed the report. Then we will dive into some of the key findings related to Beacon programs, program and school partnerships, Beacon pillars, and emerging outcomes. We conclude the presentation by sharing key lessons learned and recommendations that school staff have for strengthening Beacon programs. Final report draws on 4 primary data sources. These include many individual and focus group interviews with Beacon staff, school staff, and systems partners, including DCYF, SFBI, and SFUSD. We also draw on 3 program surveys that were completed by one person from each program, usually the Beacon director, and include questions related to services, staffing, professional development, partnerships, and use of data. We received 3 years of data from DCYF's contract management system, including data on demographics, program attendance, and enrollment. Finally, we also examined SFUSD data for all students at Beacon Community Schools. It's important to note that there are many limitations to the data we analyzed for this report. First, the number of interviews we conducted varies by site, making program comparisons and multi-year comparisons difficult. The quantitative data that we analyzed, particularly the CMS data, was limited because programs track school day activities and participation very differently. Many programs don't actually track those services at all in CMS, which makes it impossible to identify all of the students who directly participated in Beacon programming or say much about the level of participation. Also, during the pandemic, schools shifted how they tracked key data points like school attendance. Programs didn't administer student and family service surveys consistently, and schools did not administer statistics. These were all sources of data that we had planned to use in order to assess outcomes. Finally, as stated earlier, we were never able to go on site, observe programs, or interview students and families, which limits our ability to assess program quality and outcomes. Despite these limitations, we were able to collect a great deal of data on program implementation, as well as successes and challenges that programs faced during the expansion. And now I'll pass it on to my colleague, Heather, to discuss some of the cross-cutting themes that arose during our many interviews and focus groups.
Thanks, Mika. So we're sharing some cross-cutting themes before diving into more details, just because it provides a useful context for what follows. So first, as you all know, the last 3 years have been particularly challenging for schools and school-based programs. The pandemic, shelter in place, and subsequent staffing crisis over the last few years have affected every aspect of program development and in some way or the other. There's no way to know how programs might have developed without these influences, but it is important to keep in mind the significant headwind that programs faced over the last several years. At the same time, in many ways, the expansion was particularly timely for schools, as they really needed the additional support that Beacon programs were able to provide. The school staff we interviewed were generally very appreciative of Beacon programs, often reporting that they did not know how they could do their work without them. And as we will describe further in this presentation, the pandemic and subsequent staffing crisis appeared to contribute to the deepening of the partnerships between schools and programs, as school staff were able to see how the programs could help support them. In particular, programs stepped up to provide more school day and behavioral health services in order to meet the needs of students and families. And this led to a fairly significant expansion of these pillars of services over the last several years. Now we're going to highlight some relevant findings on Beacon programs. First, we'll talk a little bit about staffing. And Beacon staff are, of course, critical to the ability of programs to reach their goals and engage students. It's important to note that the number of staff at Beacon programs varies significantly, from a low of 1 full-time staff member to a high of 15 full-time staff members. These variations in staffing necessarily influence the types of services that programs can offer. As described in the overarching findings, staff recruitment and retention was identified as a challenge by many programs and schools over the last several years. Our data suggests, though, that staffing shortages were slowly improving over time. While 81% of programs were not fully staffed when they completed our survey in 2022, this dropped to 54% in 2023. That percentage is still striking and clearly too high, but it does show improvement. Similarly, while nearly half of programs reported challenges with staff retention in the 21-22 school year, this decreased to about a third of programs in 22-23. Despite the variations and challenges in staffing, school staff repeatedly praised the quality and helpfulness of Beacon staff, often citing their diversity, language capabilities, and youthfulness as key assets that made it possible for them to connect with students in a way that is different from that of school staff. This slide highlights the way that programs shifted their staffing pre- and post-pandemic towards having more full-time staff and fewer part-time staff. The number of full-time staff increased after schools returned to in-person instruction in the 21-22 school year. It decreased somewhat in 22-23, but did not return to where it was prior to the pandemic. Meanwhile, the number of part-time staff decreased and stayed lower after the pandemic. Although we don't know the factors that influence staffing at each program, the changes in staffing levels once schools returned to in-person instruction corresponded to a greater emphasis on programs providing services during the school day, including behavioral health support. In some cases, programs hired fewer part-time staff for their after-school hours, instead hiring more full-time staff that could work both during the day and after school. Increased full-time staff in 21-22 school year may also reflect increased funding for staffing from the COVID-19 relief and school reopening grants. And in a few cases, we heard that programs created more full-time positions in order to help with recruitment and retention. Our survey analysis also showed how community-based partnerships changed over time. This graph shows the percentage of programs that have different kinds of partners over a 3-year period. It shows that the percentage of programs with mental and behavioral health partners nearly doubled from 2020 to 2023. This is in keeping with what we heard from program and school staff about the increased need for mental and behavioral health services among students and families, and it is a clear indication of how Beacon programs stepped up to address that need. It also shows that the percentage of programs with partners generally dipped in the school year 21-22, which makes sense given that the COVID-19 protocols were still in place, and we also heard that many partner organizations were having trouble hiring staff. Then lastly, across the board, the 22-23 school year data shows that partnerships have rebounded and grown beyond where they were prior to the pandemic. Most or nearly all programs had an enrichment, behavioral health, and/or academic support partner. A little over half of programs had partners that engaged students in recreational activity. I'm now going to hand off to Mika, who is going to share our findings on Beacon participants and school partnerships.
The report also includes information on the characteristics of youth served by Beacons, or at least those whose participation was tracked in CMS. The number of students tracked in CMS increased slightly from 6,966 in school year 2018-2019 to 7,005 in school year 2021-2022. This increase was due to increased enrollment in summer programming. Enrollment during the school year actually declined by 5% over that same period. As illustrated in the chart on this slide, over 1/3 of participants in school year 2021-2022 identified as Hispanic Latino, another quarter as Asian, and 11% as African American. Drawing on SFUSC data, we also found that about 1/3 are English learners. In both school year 2018-2019 and 2021-2022, nearly half of students at Beacon Community Schools were enrolled in Beacon programming. In both years, we found that students in 1st through 6th grade were most likely to participate in Beacon programming, as were African American students. And again, I just want to reiterate that this does not include all students who participated in Beacon programming. For many sites, this only includes students who attended summer or after school programming. And now, beginning on the next slide, I'll discuss findings related to Beacon's partnerships with their school. The partnership between Beacon programs and their school sites forms the foundation of the services and supports that programs offer to students and families. According to the Beacon program model, Beacon programs and their school sites should collaborate and share data to develop and implement coherent strategies that reflect their complementary goals. In the following slides, we talk about programs' progress toward developing these goals and factors that have facilitated or inhibited their partnerships. Through interviews with Beacon and school staff, we investigated how Beacon programs and schools strategically coordinate and align their resources. Generally, Beacon programs coordinate with school staff at 3 different levels. First, Beacon programs collaborate with school leadership through meetings and informal communication between the Beacon director and/or assistant director and school administrators, and through the Beacon director's participation in key leadership committees. This collaboration often involves setting high-level goals and strategies to support the school. At a couple of sites, communication is more limited to Beacon and school leaders informing each other about upcoming events and initiatives that they are independently pursuing. According to the Spring 2023 program survey, about 80% of programs communicate with the principal or assistant principal at least weekly. Beacon programs also coordinate with school support staff, including family liaisons, social workers, instructional coaches, and academic liaisons, to support specific school activities, including family engagement events, wellness activities, climate and culture initiatives, and cultural events. Collaboration at this level also includes identifying strategies to support the needs of specific students and the well-being of individual families. And finally, many programs work directly with teachers. Collaboration often occurs between teachers and the Beacon school staff, the Beacon school day staff, who push into their classrooms, involving planning around classroom activities or supporting individual students. Teachers often also communicate with Beacon after-school staff about homework and assignments that need to be completed. And some also discuss the best ways to support the academic, behavioral health, and social-emotional growth of students. Notably, communication with teachers seems to have increased at some schools since the 2021-2022 school year, when 14% of schools reported that they did not have regular communication with teachers. In this last year, all programs reported having regular communication with teachers. And on the next few slides, I'll walk through some of the collaborative structures that foster this partnership. First, meetings were identified by both Beacon staff and school staff as the primary vehicle for maintaining their partnership. As one principal explained, through the regular meetings that we have, we identify what we hope to achieve and find out systems that could work for both organizations. I feel like over the last 7 years, we've been able to do that. Another middle school principal discussed how having Beacon leadership on the instructional leadership team helped them collaboratively tailor the literacy support that they were providing to the specific needs and context of their school. These meetings most commonly include standing one-on-one meetings with principals or assistant principals, as well as student support and behavior wellness meetings. That's including care team meetings or student assistance program meetings. In our interviews, staff from about 2/3 of schools also highlighted the importance of informal check-ins, things that happen over text, in the hallways, or when staff simply stop into each other's office. The programs also share and exchange data and information about students with school staff. According to our survey this spring, all programs discuss the needs of individual students with school staff, either through formal meetings, emails, or informal check-ins. And about half of programs also have access to individual student data, such as school day attendance, literacy assessment scores, or grades. And about half of programs participate in formal meetings with school staff, where they discuss school-wide data related to attendance, climate and culture, academic progress, and racial equity. Both Beacon directors and some school staff discussed the benefits of including Beacon on key school leadership teams, which provides Beacons with timely access to information, input into decision-making, and opportunities to develop and align programming towards shared goals. Conversely, some Beacon directors that were not included on these teams described how that affects their ability to operate their program. One Beacon director shared that under a previous principal, they were considered part of the school's administration team, but under the new leadership, they might still sit in key meetings, but without being an official administrator, they don't receive information in as timely a way as they had in the past, and this is causing some lack of alignment. They explained, when you're not in the original conversations about school-wide decisions, it's harder to make that alignment happen in a really integrated way. I need to be in the spaces where the decisions are made about the future course of the school and how we are going to meet the crises or the issues that are coming up. I think we need to be in those spaces. Sharing goals and strategies was also seen as an important component of the partnership between programs and schools. But the degree to which Beacon programs and their host schools collaborate around shared goals and strategies varied. Some Beacon programs fully participate in discussions around goal setting and planning school-wide strategies. These programs tended to have representation on their school's leadership or administrative teams. They are afforded some input around their shared goals. Some other programs fully embrace the goals set by the school, and most of these programs strategize with school staff to find ways to support school goals. A couple programs in this category might embrace the goals of the school, but the school and the program really have their own strategies for meeting those goals, and they pretty much operate as separate entities. And finally, a few programs collaborate with schools around supporting individual students or holding events, but there are a few intentional efforts to align higher level goals or strategies. So through these structures, Beacon and school partnerships have been growing over time. Several Beacon and school staff reflected on how their partnership and collaboration has evolved since the expansion. One Beacon director stated, "The first year was so much of Beacon directors trying to figure out how to get their principal's attention. And now that is just well behind us. Everyone is doing work around the Beacon pillars, and those have totally flourished." Several programs spoke about how the pandemic encouraged increased collaboration because school stakeholders were forced to find new ways to support students, and because the support programs provided built a foundation of trust and goodwill. As described by a middle school Beacon director, collaboration was growing prior to the pandemic. The pandemic definitely helped to solidify it. Just hearing our program described by school staff with the word indispensable, it has gotten deeper for sure. We have no problem accessing information. We have no problem getting support with ideas or things that we want to do. And this slide shows how satisfied Beacon directors were with school staff, with their communication with school staff in spring 2022 and spring 2023. As shown, their satisfaction increased. In spring 2022, 9% of programs reported that they were very unsatisfied with their communication with school leadership, and no one reported that they were very unsatisfied in 2023. In addition, 84% of directors reported that they were satisfied or very satisfied with their communication with teachers, which was an increase from 62% the previous year. Through our conversations with school and Beacon staff, we identified some common characteristics or dynamics that seem to facilitate strong partnerships. School staff highlighted the importance of the flexibility and responsiveness that programs demonstrated, really tailoring their approach to the changing needs of the school. This looked differently depending on the situation. In some cases, it was that programs were ready to shift as the needs of the school shift, particularly during the closing and then reopening of schools. In other cases, school staff talked about how programs listen to the goals of the school and figure out how they can best support that goal. In both cases, the flexibility and responsiveness were really valued by school staff. School staff also highlighted the deep relationships between Beacon staff and students and families. They know that the relationships that Beacon staff can build with students is just different than the relationships that school staff have. Not only do they value the benefit of those relationships for students, it also builds a sense of trust in the program and a motivation for school staff to invest the time to foster that partnership. And perhaps not surprisingly, school staff also mentioned how the personal relationships that they have with Beacon directors and Beacon staff also promote trust in the program itself and makes it easier to collaborate. Both Beacon and school staff sometimes discuss the importance of co-location or having offices close to each other, which encourages the informal exchanges that I mentioned earlier. And then the evaluation team realized that the programs that seem to have the strongest partnerships also collaborate with school staff at multiple levels, meaning that it's not just the Beacon director that carries all the relationships. This is when school staff feel comfortable going directly to line staff to discuss student needs as well. We also heard from one Beacon director that this really frees up their time to think about the higher level integration and strategizing that they want to work on. But of course, relationships generally do come with some challenges. And while many school staff reported that they really didn't experience many challenges in their relationship with their Beacon, other than the general challenges of running a school, others did raise some specific obstacles, the most common being staff turnover and staff shortages. When Beacon staff or critical school staff turnover, relationships need to be rebuilt and shared goals may need to be re-identified. These efforts take time and it slows the momentum of partnership development. About 1/3 of programs reported challenges related to teacher turnover, and a similar percentage reported challenges related to Beacon staff turnover. As one new assistant principal explained, I think the Beacon program is an asset to our school, and I think as a leader, I need to better understand their program, to better understand how to integrate them more into the school day activities. Several schools also discussed how they were short-staffed, and when it's all hands on deck and teachers and administrators are covering classes, it's challenging to put the time into supporting the partnership and communicating as effectively as they would like. Similarly, a few other schools reported that it's simply hard to find time for coordination and collaboration in a busy school environment, and that they would be more intentional with how they were collaborating with the Beacon if they had more hours in the day. So in summary, programs and schools use different ways to foster their partnership. Despite some of the challenges shared here, programs are finding ways to respond to the needs of their schools, and in many cases, the pandemic helped schools see the benefit of their partnership. Still, some are further along than others in developing shared leadership structures and collaborating around setting goals and strategies. And now I'll pass it back to Heather to discuss the development of the 5 Beacon pillars.
So in our report, we share very detailed findings on the specific services that programs provide within each of the core pillar areas. In this next section, we're going to present high-level findings related to each of the Beacon pillars, but please look at our report if you want to learn more about the specific activities that programs provide. So I'm going to share a little bit about what we documented regarding the development of pillar services over time. In 2020, we prepared a detailed rubric that would help us measure the development of each pillar. The rubric is included as an appendix of the report. In 2020 and 2023, we used that rubric to rate pillars for the 25 programs that we had qualitative data on for both 2020 and 2023. This analysis yielded some core findings for how pillars changed over time. Expanded learning was the most established pillar in 2020, and it remained so in 2023. All schools had expanded learning programs prior to the expansion, which laid the groundwork for strong services in this area. There was also a very slight decline in this service area in 2023, but this shift was largely due to the pandemic, which influenced attendance and partnerships over time. But still, as I said, expanded learning remained the most developed of the pillars. The pillar that experienced the most growth and development was the behavioral health and wellness pillar. This finding is supported by our qualitative data, and that we repeatedly heard from school and program staff about how large the behavioral health needs were for students and families, particularly in the 21-22 school year, when students returned to in-person instruction. Also, as presented earlier, survey findings show that the percent of programs with behavioral health partners doubled from 2020 to 2023, and these partnerships contributed to more developed services in this area. The pillar that experienced the second most area of growth, or the area that experienced the second highest level of growth, was school day services. And then this is also in keeping with the interview data, stressing how many Beacon programs expanded their school day services in order to meet the needs of their schools. As stated earlier, some programs hired more full-time staff, and this allowed them to expand their school day services. Transition services was the least developed in 2020, and it remained so in 2023. Although there was growth in this pillar, many we interviewed indicated that this was not a high priority for programs given other areas of focus. It is important to note, however, that some programs are providing a lot of transition services, and it is fundamentally, the transition services area is fundamentally different from the other pillars in that transition services tend to be more time limited in nature. They occur in bursts, for instance, at the start of the school year, the end of a school year, or the start of a school year, or in the summer, which is one reason that they might not be top of mind for program staff when they're interviewed. Overall, across programs, 4 out of the 5 pillars became more developed between 2020 and 2023. While on average we saw progress in the development of pillars, there was tremendous variation in pillar development across sites. There are many aspects of these variations that are outside the control of the program. So, for instance, pillar services vary based on the size of the school, the specific articulated needs of school staff, buy-in from school leaders, and the extensiveness of other school-based services. So, for instance, if a school has very well-developed behavioral health services, the Beacon program may play less of a role in that area. Services also vary based on the lead agency's strengths, resources, and partnerships. Some agencies have been able to leverage a lot of external funding beyond DCYF and thus are able to offer more robust services. Finally, services varied based on program staffing and capacity. We also examined variations in services by grade level. We found that elementary and K-8 schools were more likely than middle schools to follow up with families, provide clothing assistance, and offer parent workshops. They were also more likely to use a social emotional curriculum to engage students and provide individual tutoring after school. Middle schools, on the other hand, were more likely to provide support for special education classes, offer identity-based affinity groups and leadership opportunities. They were also more likely to provide support groups, individual therapy, and case management. We also found some common challenges related to pillar development. For instance, some interviewees indicated that their staff were providing academic and behavioral support services that were not aligned with their training or experience level. Some interviewees, for instance, noted that most Beacon staff are not trained teachers, so this limits their ability to provide specific types of academic support. Similarly, some interviewees said that program staff were asked to step in and mediate conflicts in the classroom or assist teachers with classroom management in ways that they felt was not aligned with their role or skill set. Another common challenge was that programs had difficulty finding partners with culturally responsive and bilingual staff. This was particularly true of behavioral health and wellness partners. There were times when programs could not refer families or students to therapy because they were not connected to a provider who offered services in the primary language of the family. Prior to the pandemic, programs engaged families primarily in person, and they shifted this to primarily engage families online during the pandemic. They also did a lot of very meaningful and useful outreach to families in order to connect them with resources throughout that period. But the stresses of the pandemic also made it harder to reach certain demographic groups or families who don't live near the school. In the latest school year, programs restarted their in-person engagement strategies and are getting families back in the habit of coming to campus. Finally, some expanded learning programs had challenges with enrollment. Some programs had waiting lists and did not have the staffing to serve all of the students that wanted to enroll. And on the other hand, other programs experienced lower enrollment and attendance than they had prior to the pandemic. This seemed particularly common among middle schools, who attributed this in part to the shift in the school day that went into effect in fall of 2021. Now I'm going to hand it off to Mika to share some preliminary outcomes.
Thanks, Heather. So now we're going to discuss some outcomes at the school, youth, and family level. As mentioned before, the evaluation was not able to capture concrete outcomes because of limited or missing data sources, such as participant and family surveys. So all of the outcomes that we outline in this section come from interviews with Beacon and school staff. Because of the exploratory nature of these outcomes, we describe them here and in the report as preliminary. We hope that a subsequent evaluation might be able to measure the degree to which Beacon contributes to these outcomes. First, I want to highlight some of the ways that Beacon programs have supported school-level outcomes, as identified by Beacon and school staff. First, many school staff members reflected on how having extra adults on campus helped teachers feel more supported and less burned out, particularly while school staff was stretched thin in the 2021-2022 school year. According to school staff, Beacon staff support in the classroom and during recess frees up teachers to focus on instruction. Several Beacon programs have worked with school staff to identify additional ways to lighten the load for teachers. The impact of Beacon presence on teachers is illustrated in this following quote. "We couldn't do lunchtime supervision without them. Having them in some of the classrooms, helping out some of the kids with high needs, just being here to help around the school, we couldn't do it without them. Without Beacon, we would be drowning. I don't think I could do my job without them." Also, after-school programs and school day instruction are better aligned. Through increased communication between school day and after-school staff, many programs reported that they're better able to support homework completion, reinforce school day instruction, and utilize behavioral management strategies that students are already familiar with and respond to. Moreover, after school and school day staff from some programs shared that when the Beacon program shares information about what is going on with individual students with teachers, students are better supported during the school day as well. School staff also now have deeper connections to students and families. Teachers at several schools have begun relying on Beacon staff and the strong relationships they hold to learn more about individual students and families. They also report engaging in thought partnership with Beacon staff around the best way to support individual students or connect with families that they might be struggling to communicate with. One teacher described this as having an ability to see the whole picture of the students they work with through their partnership with Beacon school day and after-school staff. And finally, some school staff members highlighted that the enrichment programming and events offered at the school, the social emotional support offered during class time and recess, and the connections students make to caring adults has improved the school climate. And now, turning to outcomes for students, Respondents mostly talked about how students benefited from the additional resources and opportunities that Beacon provides. These include exposure to new activities, to new ideas in sports, as well as academic and behavioral health support. Although many school respondents were reluctant to speak about concrete student outcomes, they did talk about the program having a positive influence on students. These respondents spoke of improved academic skills, communication and social emotional skills, enhanced peer relationships, an enhanced sense of safety and belonging, leadership skills, connections to caring adults, and improved attendance. Here we've included the perspective from school staff in this quote. You start to have students turning things in that have been missing, or their effort or their confidence changes, and then they start to see their grades go up and they're a little more joyful at school. And school staff also reflected on the ways in which the program influenced families. Most often, school staff emphasized that Beacon provides a safe place for students to go after school and during the summer. They said it is vital for working parents to know that they have stable childcare that they can rely on. In addition, respondents highlighted that Beacon has helped to strengthen connections between families and the school. They provided access to resources, support, and skill development, and strengthened family members' relationships with their children. School staff also noted that the Beacon program provided additional opportunities for families to engage with the school, as well as a variety of resources ranging from interpersonal support and food access to support with signing up for college savings accounts and completing middle school enrollment processes. This quote that we have here says, "I can't even tell you how emotionally impactful it was to be able to give families $200, $300, $400, and $500 gift cards with no strings attached, and then just have them share with you what they were going to do with it. Have them share with you the joy of being able to go to the grocery store, to be able to take their kids on a trip, to be able to buy clothing or shoes." And with that, I am going to pass it over to Heather to dive into some lessons and considerations.
So finally, we would like to share some key lessons learned, as well as strategies and ideas for Beacon partners to consider as they seek to strengthen the Beacon program moving forward. All of the lessons learned and considerations are for the Beacon ecosystem as a whole, rather than for individual programs or individual system partners. Our first set of lessons learned is focused on program expansion. So the expansion of Beacons to 18 new sites in 2018 was a significant effort and accomplishment in and of itself. We lifted up a few key lessons learned that may inform future expansion of programs. So first, it is important to invest in an intermediary organization like SFBI to provide support for program expansion and development. In partnership with DCOF, SFBI convened and helped to onboard Beacon directors and created professional development tracks, including Beacon director coaching, that helped to support quality practices. Beacon directors particularly appreciated the sense of community and networking support that they received through their attendance at Beacon director events. Although everyone we spoke with agreed that the expansion was a success and that it was timely, given the important role that Beacon's programs played in supporting schools during the pandemic, some said that it may have been better to scale up the number of programs more gradually over the course of several years and to have built in more time for planning. Tripling the number of programs in 1 year was very challenging for all of the system's partners, but also for agencies with multiple programs. As a core technical assistance provider, SFBI had to triple the number of people that they were providing services to at a time when they had not yet fully scaled up their own staffing. An SFBI staff member said, "I would recommend really being thoughtful about what the resources are for supporting a scale up, no matter what it is. Not that it can't be done, because it can, but it could definitely be done with less stress if you really think out and plan out all the pieces, not just the expansion of schools, but also the support." Respondents also said that given increased funding for community schools, it is important to prioritize thoughtful planning and systems of support for program expansion, including staffing, recruitment, resources. Interviewees noted the increased state and local funding for community schools, including Measure G and the establishment of the Student Success Fund in San Francisco. Interviewees shared hope and optimism about the potential of these funds for improving outcomes for SFUSD students, while also stressing the importance of thoughtful planning in order to make sure that resources are being coordinated and leveraged as effectively as possible. Respondents stressed the value of time for staff recruitment, planning with school partners, and coordinating structures. One Excel respondent said, "We're at a place where the problem is not money. We can't find the staff, and we can't create systems to organize ourselves to use resources in the best way." Our second group of lessons learned are focused on building strong program and school partnerships. As Mika described in her discussion of facilitators, responsiveness was an important factor that facilitated strong school and program partnerships. Once trust has been developed, however, there is room to draw boundaries in order to increase fidelity to the Beacon program model. Although vital for building trust, the responsiveness of programs has contributed to the wide variation in services provided by Beacon programs, particularly during the school day. In some cases, this also led programs to become stretched thin. As such, some interview respondents noted the importance of reasserting boundaries with school staff in order to stay true to the Beacon program model. One example of this is the degree to which schools started to rely on Beacon programs to provide behavioral support in the classroom. A middle school Beacon director explained, "We are really clear about establishing some boundaries more and more now with school staff about what we don't do. We're not doing discipline and classroom management. It's more helping students to access the material and get focused. It's not like what a teacher might call a counselor for or security for." Finally, Beacon and school partnerships are more resilient to turnover when they had built relationships with staff at multiple levels, particularly with teachers. Programs that had built relationships between teachers and Beacon staff, as well as staff at other levels, appeared to be less vulnerable to institutional memory loss and had more robust partnerships overall. In the systems partner focus group, an SFBI staff member echoed this by saying, "Your teachers are going to be there a long time and maybe longer than your principal. And then they're going to move up also. So build capacity at the teacher level to know about Beacons and what community schools work is." I think that's one of the things that's really important to do. Finally, we have a couple lessons on program implementation. First, it's really important to note that programs need time and consistent leadership to fully mature and develop. Although not universally true, most programs that existed prior to the expansion were able to develop deeper partnerships and more expansive programming than those that were new because they had already laid the foundation for that work to develop. It takes a lot of time to build trust with school staff. Programs that had consistent leadership were also better positioned to develop their programming. Given the challenges of the last couple of years, only a few programs had the same Beacon director and the same principal for the last 5 years. An SFBI staff member said that the programs that had consistent leadership were able to go farther, saying those programs, you can just see that the work gets deeper and broader every year. They're more creative and they meet more needs. Second, and most importantly, perhaps, even with all the challenges the last couple of years, the expansion was a success because Beacon programs provided vital support to schools and helped make them more resilient in a time of great need. School staff were so appreciative of the Beacons because they needed their support in the pandemic and in the post-pandemic period. For instance, an elementary school principal said, Beacons is absolutely vital at this point. We would be vastly reducing what we could do without them. And a middle school counselor said, we would be lost without them. We would literally fall apart. So now we move into some considerations for strengthening services moving forward. These considerations were raised by interview respondents and also reflect what our team sees as areas of development for the Beacon program overall. Many of these are already being worked on by systems partners, and thus these considerations just confirm the work that is already underway. One way to strengthen services is to strive to create more clarity and consistency in the set of services offered by Beacon programs across school sites. As stated previously, there is a high degree of variability in staffing and services. There are many reasons for the variability, including school size, robustness of non-Beacon services provided at the school, the strengths of the Beacon lead, the agency, and so on. In some ways, the variability is a feature of Beacon design in that Beacon is designed to complement existing services rather than duplicate them. The variability, however, creates challenges for stakeholders to understand what to expect from a Beacon program. For example, a respondent for Excel said it has been hard for them to understand what services were being offered by individual Beacon centers. Like, what did they share and what did they do differently? This individual argued that it would be helpful if there were a menu of services that schools could use to better understand what can be asked of their Beacon program. The variability also makes it very challenging to evaluate Beacon model as a whole because the programs differ so much from one another. Another way to strengthen services is to promote promising approaches by providing opportunities for Beacon and school staff to observe and talk to staff from strong or advanced programs. Given the variation and silos across program sites, both Beacon and school staff expressed interest in touring high quality or innovative community schools. Touring strong programs could inspire staff to adopt promising practices or at least begin thinking and talking about what is possible at their school. Lastly, it might be useful to promote resource and information sharing to support higher quality and more consistent programming across sites. Programs often operate as islands in that they independently identify their partners, coordinate their own services, and develop their own resources. Centralizing some resources would support shared expertise across programs. So for instance, programs could use support identifying partners with staff that reflect the racial and linguistic diversity of SFUSD students. We also have some considerations for strengthening partnerships. So first and foremost, it's important to consider ways to deepen SFUSD buy-in and understanding of the Beacon program model. Because school districts, including SFUSD, are large entities with multiple departments, it can be challenging to build alignment with community partners in order to implement community schools. It takes a lot of coordination to ensure that all of the different district departments are aligned. Lack of alignment and understanding of the model, particularly among school principals, however, leads to a lot of variation in services across programs, and given high principal turnover, requires Beacon directors to reorient, educate, and sell the value of their program to incoming administrators repeatedly. Rather than burdening the program with having to get buy-in from each new principal, it would be valuable for principals to be screened, onboarded, and trained with a lens that takes into account that they will be running a community school. It would be useful if there were a distinct set of expectations for principals of community schools that they are evaluated on, such as the inclusion of the Beacon directors on the core leadership team for the school. It is also important to improve processes for systems alignment with SFUSD. Although DCOF and SFBI are well aligned, interviews with system partners indicate that some of the processes and regular meetings that were put into place to support ongoing collaboration with SFUSD and Excel prior to the pandemic are not occurring now after the pandemic. For instance, Excel staff noted that they're no longer regularly attending the Beacon director meetings or meetings that SFBI is having with school principals. System stakeholders said that although vital, it is also not enough for Excel, DCOF, and SFBI to be collaborating closely. It is also important for different departments within SFUSD, including the department that oversees principals, to be engaged partners and to understand how the Beacon Community Schools model complements and strengthens other change initiatives within the district. It would be helpful also to create more joint opportunities for training and professional development for Beacon and school staff. Beacon directors and school staff reported that they value such opportunities to learn from one another and would appreciate shared trainings on how to manage student behavior, support social emotional development, promote a growth mindset, and address student trauma. It is also important to make sure that all programs have access to student data. Our survey results show that only 58% of programs have access to individual student data. Programs that have access to this data can use it to provide targeted support to students that they work with, and are also better equipped when communicating with families. Finally, in order to strengthen programs, it would be useful to clarify the role of the lead agency. There is significant variation in how Beacon lead agencies support programs and the Beacon director. For example, there are differences across lead agencies in whether the Beacon director is responsible for budgets and all aspects of program management. At the same time, an SFBI staff member said that it would be helpful for Beacon director supervisors to be involved enough with the details of the site so that they can support and potentially step in if the Beacon director leaves. An SFBI interviewee called for the development of a CBO leadership framework that will give folks both a map and also a reality check around what it means to be a CBO that has a beacon or multiple beacons. So I'm now going to hand off to Mika so that she can share considerations for data quality and wrap up the presentation.
We have some ideas for DCYF to consider as they seek to improve data quality. We understand that there are challenges creating more standardized data entry procedures and that it may increase burden on programs. But without more standardized procedures, it will remain challenging to aggregate information across programs in order to capture the breadth of Beacon program activities. So for the first recommendation is about aligning Excel and DCYF quality and reporting requirements to reduce burden on Beacon staff. DCYF and Excel have altered some data reporting requirements to reduce burden. So for example, regular attendance data are reported to DCYF, which is then transferred to Excel. Still, some respondents stated that the lack of alignment between DCYF and Excel's data entry, reporting, and program quality processes is still burdensome for them. While DCYF and Excel are different agencies and accountable to different funders, they could continue to work towards a more cohesive reporting system that would benefit both agencies and programs. Doing so would reduce burden on Beacon staff and provide them with more time to focus on their core mission of supporting students and families. Second, we recommend providing more guidance to programs around how data on attendance and activities should be entered into CMS. So we have several recommendations here. If DCYF wants to assess program implementation across program components, programs should receive some guidance on which activities should be entered into CMS. This could include standardized names for many of the most common services and guidelines regarding which services should be entered as individual level records versus events. Similarly, if DCYF wants to understand how family engagement varies across subgroups, programs would need to enroll family members as participants in CMS and track event attendance at the individual level for smaller or recurring events. And finally, providing guidance on how programs should label activities so that these activities can be clearly tied to the Beacon pillars to the extent possible. It might be helpful to create categories of services such as school day academics or school day enrichment or school day behavioral health, with the understanding that behavioral health services may be included in both academic and enrichment. And with that, we would like to thank you so much for your time today. We really enjoyed leading this evaluation, holding interviews with Beacon staff and school staff over the years, and learning more about these valuable programs. If you have any questions about this presentation or about the evaluation in general, please feel free to reach out to us at the emails listed here. Thank you.